Here's how this amp sounds with default settings. And here's how the amp sounds after applying what's in this video. This amp sim company, ML Sound Labs, says to use this Marshall JCM 800 for pop punk and punk rock tones. So let's dial in a tone that will sound amazing in a mix. You can also take your tones further with some quick mixing techniques, so keep watching and we'll get into that later in the video. So step 1, let's take the default settings and get this tone to sound more like a punk rock rhythm tone that has everything we need. So I pushed the input there until it was distorted enough, but when I went past 3 on the amp, I started to hear some fizziness and spikes in the sort of 2 to 4 kilohertz region. So I've just brought it down a little bit, so it's still distorted, but it's clean enough that we've got some clarity there. Okay, now let's use the Tube Screamer pedal to clean up the low end a bit. Cool, I'm quite liking that frequency balance, especially now I've cleaned up the low mids with the Tube Screamer. Let's turn some knobs and see what happens, but I think I'm happy with this. Cool, so I pushed the bass a bit and I actually quite liked how that sounded, pushing the bass up and having the Tube Screamer cleaned up the low mids. And it sort of excited the low end, but it's not as flubby as it was when we first started. I definitely don't want that reverb on there, so I'll turn that off. Let's hear it in context. Cool, so it sounded kind of decent in solo. It's definitely getting lost in the mix now. But we've got all the elements we need for a good tone. So now let's fit it into the mix a bit better. First thing I'm going to do is boost the volume. Cool, that's better, but the EQ response isn't fitting with the mix. Just going to turn these EQ knobs on the amp, but these are just broad strokes, so we'll get into the actual EQing and mixing of it in a second. So I hope you caught that there. Pushing the mids quite far helped fit this tone into the mix. Scooping the mids out of guitars sounds great in solo, but I think they lack context. Now, step 2, we have all the elements we need from the amp. Good balance of presence, mids and lows, and a cool sound. So now you want to carve out some clarity, which is really important, and get some presence and life into the tone, fit it into the mix. And just quickly, if you make music like this and you need me to mix your next song, then head over to my website, terrybeckleyrecording.com, and get in touch with me via the contact form. I will get back to you. Now let's take this tone further. As always, if you've seen my other videos, I love running my tones through the Shep 73 from Waves, just for the small amount of harmonic saturation. Okay, it's time for EQ. So the first thing I'll do is roll off the very top and very bottom end, as guitars, for me, are a mid-range instrument. Let's bring the bass back in to get a better sense of where to place this filter. Cool, that sounds like they connect well there. Now to roll off the top end to help with that harshness that you get from amp sims and digital amps. Cool, so that didn't do anything to the tone, but when I get rid of that filter, if you listen carefully, you can just hear this fizz. You're never going to need that because you've got cymbals up there, and all it's going to do is fight with those and create a harsh top end. Okay, on to the next part of EQ. If you remember, we boosted the mids quite hard, so now we're going to refine that mid boost with a well-placed cut, which should give us some decent clarity. Now let's check and make sure that didn't ruin our tone. Did you hear how much that cleaned up the mid-range? Got that windy sort of noise that's happening and pulled it out. Now we want to fish for some of those harsh frequencies and just reduce them slightly because we don't want to kill the bite and energy of the tone. That's 2.5K. Now there's one higher up, I think, 3.5 to 4. Let's go find that. Cool, so I tried to get away with as smaller cut as possible, and I've made them both dynamic because the amount of that frequency is building up changes as the part is played. So I want to try and keep a constant amount of top end without it getting harsh. So let's A-B our entire EQ. That's quite cool, right? We're not killing the tone, but the difference is quite massive when you A-B that, and it's just cleaning up the junk. Now let's hear that in the context of the mix. Cool, it's still missing something. The bass is way more present than it shouldn't be. So now it's time to open up the guitars with a bit of top end boost. The first thing I like to try is boosting 8K with the SSL channel from Waves. Let's see how this sounds. Now that really brought it forward into the mix. Let's bypass that boost and see the difference that it made. So without that, the guitars have a much darker vibe and everything else is quite bright. So there's a mismatch there. It doesn't quite fit into the mix. So it's pretty important. Now I'm a fan of post-saturation, so I'm going to bring in the Saturn II from FabFilter. And for guitars, I like to try the tube, the warm tube first. See how that sounds. Cool. I like the excitement that that brings it. So you can make great pop punk and emo music without paying to use an expensive recording studio. So if you want to see more videos that help with that, then check out my channel. It's very likely there are other valuable videos for you there. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.